change is scary. I get that. I totally get that. Even when you know that change is for the better, it can still be hard to make that transition from what you're comfortable with to something new. Case in point, Claire and I are looking to make a change with Subjectively. As much as we enjoy what we've been doing with the Maza region for the past few years, we know that to grow as artists and as people, we need to introduce some other content to our channel. We're excited for this change, but we also understand that it might be a bit of a rough transition. We have a habit of getting into routines, finding a pattern of doing things that works well for us. I'm sure you're familiar with the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That philosophy doesn't really apply to art. I understand that there's a good chance some people aren't gonna like the changes they see in this video. That's always a possibility when you share your artwork with the world. But if everyone liked all of the same things, art as we know it could not exist. But hell, I'm gonna take the risk and make those big final changes to the Maza region Pokedex just like I said I would, and hopefully you guys will like them as much as I do. We're back, everyone. Welcome to Subjectively. This is a follow-up to our Redesigning Our Pokedex video that we uploaded a few weeks ago. In that video, we went through the entire Maza region Pokedex and picked a few designs that needed one final tune-up before I closed the book on my Maza region YouTube series. We only managed to get through about 2/3 of the redesigns, however. There are still a handful of Pokemon that I want to adjust, and we've saved the biggest changes for last. These Pokemon, as the title of the tier suggests, need major changes to get them to the place that I want them to be. Hopefully the changes I make to these guys will help fans of the designs like them even more, and get people who don't like their designs to give them another chance. At the very least, they'll push each Fakemon to the place that I've always wanted them to be. Before we look at the changes I made to this final group of Maza region Pokemon, however, I want to take a second to thank all of our amazing Patreon supporters. We may be changing up the way that we do things at Subjectively, but one thing that will never change is how much we appreciate our devoted fans. Everything we do here is made possible by you guys, and we seriously can't thank you enough. If you'd like to help support our channel and get your hands on some exclusive Subjectively merchandise, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. Every dollar counts, and we really appreciate it. Now, don't worry, I read the comments. I know that the biggest miss from the previous Maza region video was Maze Men. Hopefully the slight adjustments I made to that design help you guys like it a little bit more, and I appreciate everyone's feedback on the design. In fact, sometimes outside perspectives are necessary to make vital changes to your artwork, and to yourself, that will benefit you in the long run. We're all aware of our shortcomings and our flaws, but sometimes there are things that people need to point out to you before you can really notice them. The Pokemon that we'll be looking at today are all ones that I'm happy with on some level, but over the many years since I first created them, I've gotten tons of feedback on ways that I could change them in order to get them to a point where I could confidently say I'm at least 90% happy with them. And that's what I did. I took that input to heart, reflected on it, and came to some conclusions that met somewhere in the middle between what other people wanted to see and what my original concept was. It's almost as if I'm working with a team, and any professional artist will tell you that your best work will be done in a group setting. Having rounds of critiques and plenty of feedback from your peers will fine-tune your original idea into something better than any one person could create. Now, let me just for a second go back to what I said before I made this point. Years ago, not months ago, not a year ago, years ago, I came up with these designs. I came up with these designs years ago. The oldest one is just about 3 years old. That's crazy to me. I mean, so much about an artist changes over the course of 3 years. It's insane that these designs haven't changed more, to be honest. Take Chispika, for example. Now, Chispika is such an old concept that when I had designed it, it was for a video called Unique Type Combinations. Yeah, there wasn't an official electric fighting type at the time that I came up with Chispika. Now there are 3. Interestingly enough, Gamefreak seemed to have a similar idea to my own, making Gen 9's Pika clone the Pokedex's first electric fighting type. Of course, the concepts for both Pokemon are very different. They went with a defibrillator hamster, which, granted, is actually a pretty cute idea, whereas the route that I took with Chispika was more along the lines of luchador electric bat. You know, those vibes. Originally, and you hate to hear an artist say this about their own work, but I gotta be honest, the design for Chispika was just hideous. This thing is straight up ugly, and, well, I don't even really think I was happy with it when I drew it the first time. I redrew it again, maybe like 2 years ago, and tried to lean more into the cutesy side of its design. A lot of my Pokemon from the Mazo region are big, menacing, and tend to skew masculine. I think these are aesthetics that come easily to me because they appeal to me as a person and as an artist. Conversely, I tend to struggle with making cutesy Pokemon for an entirely different crowd, but I wanted Chispika to fall more on the cute little guy end of the spectrum. My final take on Chispika actually took 2 tries. Firstly, I wanted to change its pose. I really struggled with dynamic posing in all of my old Pokemon key art. I think it was because I forced myself to work on square canvases. I don't know why I did that. Instead of having Chispika just standing and pointing, I wanted to give it a little bit more energy. I made it leaping into the air, as if mid-flying press, which I thought helped make it feel more like an actual bat. The wings of Chispika are not, like, capable of flight. I guess if anything, they're more like flying squirrel flaps than real bat wings. I wanted it to feel like a cape, something that a luchador would wear, but I also wanted to evoke some bat-like imagery. People would tell me all the time, you should add a bat Pokemon to the Mazo region, and I remember thinking, I already did? But after enough people had asked me this question, it occurred to me that people really weren't reading Chispika as a bat at all, and I can't say that I blame them. Anyway, I finished this design and decided to take one last crack at it because it still wasn't as cute as I wanted it to be. I also didn't nail that flying press pose that I wanted. Finally though, I ended up with a design that I could be happy with. Chispika still looked tough, like it had a strong fighting spirit and an urge to throw down, but it also had the perfect amount of aww factor that I was looking for. And yes, probably the most significant change that I made to this was to its shiny. Imagine seeing this little guy fly out of his bat cave. So there you have it, out with the old and in with the new, but Chispika was only a single stage Pokemon. What about making changes to an entire 3-stage line? In the last video, I made some subtle changes to Lilirena, the first of a 3-stage evolution of a Pokemon that I consider to be one of the most iconic of the Mazo region. As you might have guessed, those changes were all pretty minor, but what we have now is still a very different design than the original iteration of Lilirena. Because this line is such an integral part of the Mazo region, and specifically the story of Project Untamed, what with it being the rival's main Pokemon, I wanted to make sure that all 3 members of Lilirena's evolutionary line were designs that I could be proud of. Starting with Yakina, the first evolution of Lilirena. Yakina, like Lilirena, is supposed to look cute, fancy, delicate, and vulnerable. It's supposed to be the kind of Pokemon you'd see a little kid playing with, but maybe not the kind of Pokemon you'd want your child to have. After all, it is inspired by a supernatural story of a mother who drowned her own child, so we need some creepy undertones in there as well. Originally, I wanted the hair to look as though it was suspended in water, like the Pokemon was constantly submerged even when it was on land. That didn't come through super well in this original iteration, so that was the first thing I changed after I readjusted the pose. I made it look light and weightless, but not without form. Hair that's being suspended in liquid retains its volume, and it usually becomes even more voluminous without gravity pulling it down to earth. The body needed a lot of thought and consideration put into it. The amount of visual real estate that it took up while contributing very little to the design was frustrating to me, but it took me a couple drafts to get it just right, as you'll see throughout the time-lapse. The face itself received some changes as well. I wanted it to look sadder, more explicitly like it was crying. I also made the tear pattern under the eye more legible as well. As is custom with these middle stage evolutions, Yakina introduced a change in personality from its previous form. Whereas Lilirena is simply crying, I wanted Yakina to look more like it was pouting. It's more of a melodramatic teen than it is a petulant child. The one thing I didn't want to change though was the colors, but I did go back on my decision to render reflective water in the hair. I realized at this point in the process that the only reason I had resorted to that light treatment was because the negative space on the hair was too poorly considered, and I felt obliged to break it up somehow. Now, with a far more well-considered approach to designing the hair, I didn't need that wavering light anymore. Yakina's evolution, Yoranaqua, needed some considerable adjustments. My biggest issue with this key art was the silhouette. If you look at this design blocked with a single color, it reads as one big mush. There's no distinction in the anatomy at all, and so much of the personality in the pose is lost. I changed that by making some of the hair float upwards, like with Yakina. This conveyed that I'm still underwater even when I'm not underwater look, and distinguished the head and the body from the wild hair. I also gave the hair more texture through additional lines and shapes to further break up the silhouette. The pose changed with the rest of the body, which helped make the whole thing much more legible. I always imagined Aqua to be bending over, as if someone had just interrupted it as it was submerging something below the water, kind of caught red-handed. You could almost never tell before, as the hair had been obscuring most of the anatomy, but I did always want it to have this pose. The biggest change was probably the inclusion of some big bony thighs. Aqua, in its original art, was floating, but in its most recent design I grounded it. I still imagine that it can float, but it also has some deformed skeletal legs that it now can finally show off. This helped break up all that awkward negative space on the dress that was just a sinkhole to the eyes. The head and the face remained mostly the same, but I changed the tattering on the bottom of the dress so it didn't look like fur or, I don't know, I guess more hair. Again, the colors remained unchanged here. I was happy with the way they looked in the original design. Oh, and I changed these shinies as well. Remember, if you want to check out the full Maza region Pokedex at any point, be sure to visit our DeviantArt page. The link is down in the description. I think these are the designs that, so far, have received the biggest changes. Changes for the better, I hope, but as I said before, I completely expect some people not to like them. Unfortunately for those folks, however, these are the last changes that this line will receive. And speaking of last, we've made it to the final 4 Pokemon that have been in desperate need of attention for quite some time now, the legendary Sirens. I'm going to give a quick backstory of these 4 Pokemon for those of you who might not have been here back when I first conceived them. Here at Subjectively, we like to make art. Sometimes that means drawing things other than Pokemon, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with our month-long drawing challenge series. Smoggist, Apoctober, Mermay, these challenges are a great way to share art and develop healthy working habits. 2 years ago, I did my second annual Mermay challenge, drawing a different aquatic-themed horror every day for the entire month of May. In addition to the Diary of Argyle Finch, I also designed 4 Pokemon for the Maza region, the legendary Sirens. Now, let's not get too caught up on the word siren. I know the fantasy gatekeepers have already adjusted their glasses and have begun typing in the comments about how sirens and mermaids aren't actually the same thing. It just sounded nice, okay? We're sacrificing accuracy for the sake of aesthetics. And can you really be accurate when it comes to the topic of fictional creatures? The sirens, visually, are sort of the Pokesonified versions of my Mermay artwork. Somewhere between creepy, mysterious, and intriguing, they represent different oceanic ecosystems as well as different genres of music, though I didn't really focus too much on the latter in my original designs, but we'll get to that in a bit. They're not really based on anything specific. Like most of my favorite Pokemon, they create their own story rather than taking an existing concept and throwing it into the world of Pokemon. Well, unless you count my Mermaid story as an existing concept. The main thought in my head was to keep them weird, but to change the kinds of questions that people were asking about them. If ambiguity is your goal with a character, don't simplify your character just because someone doesn't get it. Not getting it is the whole point. However, make sure that the parts of the design that you want them to read clearly can be read clearly, and vice versa. Take, for example, the Gaping Dragon from Dark Souls. Yes, this thing is hard to comprehend at a singular glance, and that's intentional. Some parts of its body, however, are clearly identifiable. We see its legs and its arms, both important for a player to recognize as they will have to avoid these limbs while fighting the creature. However, this familiar imagery is coupled with a very abstract torso, where we would expect to see a chest, a neck, and a head. There is only a massive pit of teeth and maybe bones. This part of the design is the part that we're meant not to understand, and this lack of understanding is what makes this design so impactful. If there was any confusion about the legs or the arms, the full impact of this horrifying lack of a torso would be lost, and the audience would be left wondering about all the wrong things. Same thing goes for a design like Melumeuse. I wanted people to wonder about why this Pokemon looked so uncannily human, and yet had so many features that contradicted its anthropomorphic guise. What I didn't want is for people to get hung up on aspects of its design like its legs? And to be honest, I'm not even sure if I knew what I wanted these to be when I first drew them. But we're gonna save Melumeuse for last. It's my favorite of the 4 Sirens, and the one that probably received the biggest changes, and certainly the most. We'll start with Melucali, which probably changed the least. The biggest change, actually, was to its name. I changed it to Melumorn because, well, all the other Sirens had that alliteration in their names. Melumeuse, Melumist, Melumonder, Melucali. No, doesn't sound right. Melumorn was the design that I was most happy with after some considerable time had passed from me first designing the Sirens. I liked the shape variety, I liked the tone of the character, and I liked that it felt like a dark type even though it was predominantly white. The biggest changes were to the head and upper body. I made its table coral hat a little bit more dimensional and a little bit more hat-like. I had said earlier that I wanted to bring a little bit more inspiration from actual music genres to influence the design of each of these Pokemon. Melumorn sings a song of grief for the slow destruction of its home. Instruments like organs, violins, and melancholy trumpets played in my head when I designed this Fakemon. I also imagined its voice to be deep but soft, like a church choir singer performing an emotional Ave Maria. That's pretty much it for the changes I made to Melumorn. Well, except for one tiny thing. Yes, I changed the shiny. Actually, I changed the shiny for all of the Sirens. I'll show each one in turn. I'm going to let you guys try and guess why I decided to go with this consistent palette for all 4 shinies. Yes, there is, in fact, a reason. Melumorn may not have even warranted being on the major overhaul tier of this list. I really didn't change that much, but Melumonder is definitely worthy of that designation. Melumonder is the open ocean Pokemon and designed to reflect the infinite sea, stretching out before us mere mortals as beautiful as it is frightening. The original design was somewhat nun-like, which I liked, but I'm not sure if it quite captured that feeling that I wanted to convey. Moreover, there was a bigger problem with unused negative space. About 60% of this design was the lower half, something like a ray but bulbous and round in a way that made the character feel heavy, burdened. I liked the ray aspect, but I wanted this part of Melumonder to be reined in a little bit. More loose, flowy, and with more implied movement. Something that changed about Melumonder before I even thought about revisiting it was the typing. I had made it pure water originally, but the crew over in Project Untamed Development decided it wasn't fair for it to be the only Siren that wasn't a dual type. Honestly, they had a point. Now, Melumonder is part Psychic. Psychic is a very vague type in terms of visual representation. Psychic types can look like anything from a frog mime to a sentient robot to a giant fish dragon, so I wasn't too worried about including the typing in its design. My focus was to convey more clearly the tone of Melumonder. Its song is alluring but hypnotizing. Anyone who hears it falls into a trance, losing all sense of direction but continuing to wander aimlessly in search of its beautiful melody. I imagined something like an opera accompanied by classical music and maybe even something more contemporary. Soul music, some smooth jazz, music that has a subtle romantic energy that calms the listener but keeps them engaged. Visually, Melumonder should be beautiful but strange, like a mirage that's not quite complete. I imagined it drifting in the waves like a jellyfish, letting the currents take it where they will. I went through a couple of different drafts of this design before I settled on something that I liked. One of the biggest changes came with the inclusion of hair. More like tentacles than real human hair, but nonetheless serving to look like human hair. This allowed me to introduce a strong accent color to Melumonder's palette, which I think helped a lot. There was suddenly a strong pop of contrast that I thought helped elevate its beauty factor and improve the design overall. Here's the new shiny for the new Melumeuse, once again a fun sepia filter. Any guesses why? I'll let you ruminate on that while we move on to Melumist, a design that was once my least favorite of the 4 Sirens. Melumist was designed with the prompt Deep Sea in mind. It represents the unknowable void that is the bottom of the ocean, and all the terrors that may reside therein. Now, I had always wanted crustacean imagery to inform a good portion of Meliumist's design, specifically things like isopods and copepods. My main reason for this was, obviously, to reflect the kinds of animals that live on the ocean's floor. More importantly, however, the very alien-like body plans of these creatures would help make Meliumist feel a lot less human than the other three sirens. Meliamonder and Meliamorn, while still very rare Pokemon, come in contact with humans far more often than Meliumist. In fact, very few humans have ever seen this legendary siren, and its physical appearance reflects this fact. That said, Meliumist was never intended to be so frightening that it felt out of place among its more approachable-looking brethren. I still wanted that middle ground between beauty and mystery, so Meliumist needed to have some semblance of humanity in its design in a similar way to the other three sirens. Originally, my concept for Meliumist was to have some sort of defensive mimicry thing going on, its shell resembling the maw of some massive undersea monster. I feel like this didn't really come across quite so well in the original design, so I made sure that that read more clearly in my rework. Like with so many of my older Pokemon designs, the silhouette of Meliumist was just terrible. Just one big blob without any movement, flow, or energy. I was able to keep the essence of its defensive, bulky form while still depicting a fluid, feminine figure within it to echo the appearances of the other sirens. Thinking about musical genres like punk, metal, and even a bit of opera helped to refine the original concept into something much more interesting. Meliumist didn't need any color changes, unlike Meliamonder. In fact, I really liked its original colors. Like the previous two sirens, though, it did get a new shiny. With Meliumist finished, that leaves us with only one more siren to redesign, Meliamuse. Meliamuse was the first of the four sirens that I had designed, and as such, it informed much of the visual identity of the quartet. The humanoid face, the shell arms, and that overall feeling of something vaguely anthropomorphic and yet nowhere near human. A lot about Meliamuse is weird, but a lot of what is weird about it is intentional and part of the charm. As much as it may be tempting to look at a design like this and say, let's change the parts of it that seem weird, it was important to me to stay faithful to that otherworldly presence that I felt Meliamuse conveyed. This one took a long time to finish. I did several different drafts of a new Meliamuse before I was able to settle on a design that I liked. I streamed some of this live on YouTube, and I think a few of you were there to help give me some feedback and advice. Claire also gave me some input, which was incredibly valuable, as she is an expert on all things creepy and cute. Claire is also really good at working with negative space and shape. Her idea to add more movement to Meliamuse's fins was brilliant. I wanted to bring some pop music energy into Meliamuse's design, and loose, flowy shapes not only conveyed that energy, but they also mimicked the shape of a winding river. Meliamuse is the estuary Pokemon, living in shallow waters where the river meets the sea. Because of this, it's the siren most encountered by humans, and by far the most friendly. Whereas Meliamonder enjoys leading sailors astray, or as Meliamorn brings despair to the hearts of all who hear its song, Meliamuse delights in bringing joy and inspiration to humankind. I wanted it to look friendly, energetic, and kind, like a young, enthusiastic pop star looking to bring a smile to their audience. I wanted to clarify some of the other ambiguous elements about Meliamuse's design as well, like its legs and its hair. I think what it really boiled down to with the old design was that I, as the creator of this character, didn't really know what it was that I wanted to convey. This, of course, led to confusion for anyone looking at it, and not in a good way. To reiterate what I said before, if your goal with the character design is to make an audience confused, then that's great. But make sure that when you design it that people aren't confused about the wrong things. I think the changes I made to Meliamuse do that. With those changes to Meliamuse, we are not only done with the changes in this video, but with all of the changes that I wanted to make to the Maza region Pokedex. It's kind of weird to say that out loud. You know, a big part of me doesn't want to be done with the Maza region. It's been a major focus of my life for so long, it feels weird to finally acknowledge that it's time to move on. I know that, like all of the changes I made to Meliamuse, Uranaqua, and the rest of the Maza Dex, this change will be for the better. I'm sure it'll be just as tough for any of you as it is for me. I know how much you love our Pokemon content. And don't worry, we'll still make videos about Pokemon. I mean, how could we not? but I'm looking forward to expanding into some different areas, talking about art and our experiences as artists on a broader scale. And while I don't plan on making another Fakemon region, I'm excited to try my hand at designing an entirely new collectible monster world. I think the legendary sirens are a good example of the general direction I'm hoping to take that idea in. I hope you guys are as excited for this change as we are. With that, I want to say thank you to all of you who joined along with us on this Maza adventure. Keep an eye out for the fan game. When it's done, I am definitely going to play it on stream. Thanks again to everyone who makes this channel possible. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.